This is Rogers TV.
Hi, I'm Carl Wells, getting ready to record another edition of Carl Wells Point to Point. It's a program where I chat with members of our community and they talk candidly about their lives and careers, from their earliest dreams to their greatest triumphs. I think you'll find it informative and entertaining. Please join us for Carl Wells Point to Point, right here on Rogers TV.
Just can't smile without you.
Hello everyone, and welcome to tonight's episode of Out of the Fog. I am your guest host, Laurabel. I'm the Fund Development Coordinator with the Canadian Mental Health Association of Newfoundland and Labrador. I sit on the board of the St. John's Women's Council, and I'm also an active member of the Anti-Racism Coalition of Newfoundland and Labrador. Tonight we'll be having an in-depth conversation about mental health within our province. I'll be joined by three amazing guests: Bailey Reid from CMHA, Newfoundland and Labrador, Dr. Janine Hubbard from the Association of Psychology in Newfoundland and Labrador, and Brad Glynn, the Executive Director of CHANNAL. So sit back, relax, and join us for an enlightening conversation on mental health in our province.
You're watching Rogers TV, St. John's.
The new VP in Laszlo.
I'm not sure if the baby is Marcus. What?
All that bull you told me about disrespecting our marriage, I'm your husband, you giving it away.
We get an interesting lead in the Waltons murder.
You ever heard of the Foundation?
I wanted to ask you something about the case.
The Vanessa King case.
You're watching Rogers TV, St. John's.
And welcome back, everyone. We are now joined by Bailey Reid, the Manager of Public Policy and Engagement with the Canadian Mental Health Association of Newfoundland and Labrador. Bailey, thank you for joining us.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here, Laurabel.
I'm so excited to have you on the couch with us today. So, do you mind telling us a little bit about what you do at CMHA and about the Public Reporting Project?
Right. So, my job is policy and public engagement. So, I do a lot of qualitative research. So, a lot of the research on the mental health and addiction system here in the province is quantitative. So, a lot of numbers. Okay. You know, how many people walked into the emergency room this year, you know, for a mental health concern, or how much it all cost. And while those are really, really important numbers, it doesn't give us that depth and richness of the data that, you know, we really need to know in order to make our mental health and addiction system better. So a big part of my position is doing qualitative data analysis and qualitative interviews. So meaning I talk to people. I talk to people from across the province about their experience using mental health and addiction services, whether they be good experiences or bad experiences or somewhere in between. And then I sort of compile that information and find, I guess, the major themes between what people are saying about their experiences. So that's a big part of my job, is the research aspect, but also the public engagement piece too. So, you know, I answer questions and queries from, you know, all across the province on mental health and addiction services. I kind of serve at times as, you know, a systems navigator, very similar to Barry Hewitt, who is our mental health and addiction systems navigator with Eastern Health. And yeah, I talk to people. I sit down and I listen to people. I don't provide any clinical counseling in this role, although I am a social worker. But in this role, I mainly just listen to people, listen to their stories and help provide them with resource counseling and how to get to the next place or the next step to, achieve the help and support that it is they're seeking.
Okay. So we know CMHA recently published a public report project called Embracing Our Experiences. Do you mind telling me a little bit about what that was and what kind of led to that?
Right. So Embracing Experiences is the first independent public report on the mental health and addiction system here in the province. So previously we had Toward Recovery come out from the government. So the government was reviewing its own mental health and addiction system. And while that was great and Towards Recovery did some very foundationally important work, I think they came out with some 50 to 70 recommendations on system change. Embracing Experiences and the Canadian Mental Health Association want to complement that work by, reporting on the progress of those recommendations that Toward Recovery came out with in 2017 and figuring out, how far we've gone with some of those recommendations and how far yet we need to go. So it's very much a complementary work to the government, although it is independent of the government. CMHA staff are going out. We're interviewing people across the province, like I said, talking to them about their experiences, and then putting all that together in a report form with some major themes. So just to tell you, I guess, the 4 major themes of the report that came out when we did it were access and navigation. So, people's issues with accessing mental health services and then navigating them once they're within the system. The second major theme was continuity. So continuity in care being like streamlined services, being relationships and relationship building and continuous relationship building with healthcare providers. Aftercare was talked about a lot in that theme as well. The third was proactive versus reactive services. So a lot of folks want to see more proactive mental health services rather than the reactive crisis-oriented mental health services. We need more proactive services in order to prevent crises from happening in the first place, instead of just reacting to it after the fact. And then the final theme that came through in this report and the 40 interviews we did with people across the province was confidence in the system. A lot of people have lost their confidence in healthcare providers and in the system as a whole, that they're going to be able to support and help them. While some people did talk about very positive experiences with their healthcare providers, with their psychiatrists, a lot of people talked about, not totally trusting, the medications that they were prescribed, being prescribed medications that they may have been allergic to, lack of relationship building and communication between themselves and, the professional helping them or working for them. And a lot of people attributed, who actually had good experiences with the system, they attributed it to luck, which was a very interesting finding.
Perfect. So we know when you did that report, you found that there wasn't a lot of buy-in from the BIPOC community. So what would you guys like to see happen in the future to better support that community?
Right. So a major limitation of the report was that the majority of people who signed up were, white, relatively wealthy, relatively privileged individuals. We did have a number of people from the 2S LGBTQ community, which we were very happy to see, but unfortunately, we didn't get as many Black, Indigenous, or people of color involved in the study, and that's definitely a limitation. And if we know anything, by now, we know that racism is institutionalized, microaggressions happen every day, especially within systems and healthcare systems, and ultimately, if white privileged folks are experiencing these issues with the system, not feeling like they're not believed for their mental health concerns, et cetera, then certainly folks from the Black, Indigenous, and people of color populations and communities are experiencing that even at a deeper level, because racism can be very entrenched into those healthcare systems and the mental health care system. So, like I said, of course, if privileged white folks are experiencing this, then there has to be a deeper level that Black folks are experiencing this or Indigenous folks are experiencing this. So we need to talk to them, and we need to build better relationships with these communities in Newfoundland and Labrador. The Canadian Mental Health Association wants to build relationships with these communities here so that we can build that trust and do these interviews and hear their stories. and then, of course, use them to make system changes and transformation.
So if people were looking to get in contact with you to kind of share their experiences and they were interested in the next stage of the public reporting project, what would they need to do?
They just need to contact me at my CMHA email, which is breid@cmhanl.ca, or they can call me. My number is 683-1848, and I'm available from 8:30 a.m. until 4:30 p.m. Monday to Friday. And we can have a discussion about, their interest in the report. We also go through confidentiality with people, the risks and the benefits of participation. And, we go through a lot of ethical processes to make sure that, people are fully aware of what they're signing up for.
Perfect. Thank you so much for joining me, and stay tuned to see our next guest.
Hi, I'm Carl Wells, getting ready to record another edition of Carl Wells Point to Point. It's a program where I chat with members of our community, and they talk candidly about their lives and careers, from their earliest dreams to their greatest triumphs. I think you'll find it informative and entertaining. Please join us for Carl Wells Point to Point, right here on Rogers TV.
When an impaired driver killed my brother DJ, some people used the A word. They called it an accident, but it wasn't. An accident implies that no one was at fault. But when someone impaired by alcohol and/or drugs chooses to drive, they are fully responsible for the crash that can result. So please, for the memory of my brother DJ and the thousands of families whose lives have been shattered by impaired drivers, let's drop the A word.
A crash caused by impaired driving is not an accident.
And welcome back, everyone. We are now joined by Dr. Janine Hubbard, the president of the Association of Psychology of Newfoundland and Labrador, who's also a registered psychologist. Thank you for joining us, Dr. Hubbard.
Thank you so much for having me here.
I'm so glad to have you. So we're going to be talking a little bit about men's mental health. As some of our viewers may or may not know, men are definitely dealing with a mental health crisis right now. We are losing 4 times more men to suicide than we are women. So what's going on in the world of men's mental health?
Oh boy, I'm so glad we're able to talk about it. And some of it is that men's mental health issues are often misidentified because they present very differently. When a woman is experiencing anxiety or depression, she's far more likely to express the classic signs, the sadness, the crying, the withdrawal, the loss of interest. Men's mental health often comes out in physical symptoms. Okay. So they're having more headaches, they're having issues with their gut or their digestive system, they're having pains. So they're far more likely, and first of all, they're far more likely not to get any kind of medical treatment for that. But then again, the focus is on the physical ailments. Not saying, actually, I lost my job and this is what's happened and this is how I'm feeling. So it's often takes a lot of digging to get to the, oh no, your feelings are coming out in very physical ways, but it's actually not an issue with your stomach, it's an issue with your mental health.
Okay, so men's mental health is presenting more in physical ailments than it is in what we're typically used to seeing in women.
For sure, and then the mental health presentation itself comes out differently. Okay. So it's far more likely to come out in things like irritability, impulsiveness. It's going to come out in things like use of alcohol and substance use. Okay. So it comes out, again, a little differently. You don't think of someone who is depressed or really anxious necessarily having it come out that way. Okay.
So then what do we do? What do we do to get the conversation started? What do we do to get men more open to talking about their mental health so they can take the steps to seek help?
Well, partly we talk about the fact that it exists and it's a massive problem. You're quite right. 75% of suicides last year in Canada were by men. That's roughly 50 men every week in this country.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's a lot of men, a lot of families.
We know that there are some surprising things. 10% of new fathers experience postpartum depression symptoms.
See,
and nobody ever talks about that.
No.
We have up to, I believe it's between kind of 15 and 35% of individuals with eating disorders are males.
See, we never get to see that.
We never talk about that piece of things. And so there isn't that openness or that acceptance. The other thing is our stats in terms of, for example, in BC, drug overdoses.
Okay.
Vast majority of individuals who died from a drug overdose were men.
Wow, see, that is absolutely alarming and astonishing.
It is really alarming, and that's why, like I say, I'm so glad we're talking about it. And some of it is simply making people aware of these stats. Some of it is the ongoing discussion we've been having around the, it's okay. There's no shame in, it's the, not weak. Okay. Messages. Those are super important to be having because, again, we really want to have that discussion happening. We know that throughout the pandemic, things like unemployment or just the change and shift in household environments, and in some cases, more people being home, a shift in those household responsibilities, but also just a shift in the amount of time being spent on things, again, has really increased, mental health issues for everybody, but again, it has looked a little bit different for men.
So what can we do to support the men in our lives once we create a space that they're talking about their mental health more openly and more often? Is there any advice you'd like to share?
Sure. And again, it's starting the conversation. What I would ask is, the women in their lives are pretty good about, trying to get it out. But if every man who was watching this evening or this morning, whenever it's airing, reached out to one male friend and said, hey, I just want to check in because I know this past year's been really rough. How you doing? That basic thing. And then from a more systemic issue, looking at the fact that men respond to different mental health treatments.
Okay.
So that many of them don't necessarily respond to kind of a one-on-one, and let's face it, most of our mental health practitioners are women. We have found that in some cases, support groups can be really helpful. It takes a lot to get there, but once you get there, it happens. But there's some really interesting research looking at activity-based therapeutic programs. Okay. So, we go and we build something together. Oh. So it's a shared project, whether it's building a dory together, whether it's, helping on something, but that allows kind of that shared activity at the same time, kind of some open space to be having that dialogue. If you've got a friend or a buddy you're worried about, take them out fishing, take them out for a walk. Like sometimes it's that getting away from the household thing and doing something together, whether it's one-on-one or in a group, can really help to facilitate that conversation. So those of us in the mental health world really need to step back and kind of go, how are we offering services? And are we offering the services that are needed? Okay.
So getting people more engaged, reaching out to your friend, having that open space to have that safe one-on-one conversation is definitely more important for men to be doing these days.
For sure. And for physicians to be starting to have the conversation of, you've had a lot of headaches, let's take that one step further. Okay. And have that really important conversation.
So if there were any men watching who are listening tonight, what would be one thing they can do if they're making that steps to reach out? Should they call reach out to the Association of Psychology, or should they reach out to their doctors? What's the first step?
Well, first thing to remember, and I always like to mention it, is there are suicide crisis lines. We have the mental health crisis line. We have the Doorways programs. There are a number of, we have the CHANNAL warm line. There are a number of ways to be seen quickly and urgently. And if you are ever feeling, in immediate suicidal distress, please present to your nearest emergency department because we know these numbers are serious. Yeah. And then beyond that, taking a look at Bridge the Gap. There's some options there. If you're comfortable with your family physician, that's a great place to start. AP&L has a listing of psychologists that are out there. There are a listing of, mental health clinics throughout the province. I know I have some men who feel very uncomfortable, even in the face-to-face. Well, guess what? We're all doing virtual care these days. Sometimes that's an easier option. So figuring out what kind of option might work best.
Okay. And then taking that step.
And then taking the plunge. And sometimes you need a friend or a loved one or someone to make that initial call for you, and that's okay.
That's fantastic. I'd love to thank you for taking the time to sit here with me and discuss such an important subject. I know it's something that's affecting lots of men out there, so thank you so much.
Oh, thanks for covering such an important topic.
It's been fantastic. Thank you, and we'll be right back with our next guest.
If you have a comment about this program, we'd love to hear it. Email or call us, or send us your feedback through social media.
Welcome back, everyone. We are now joined by Brad Glynn, the Executive Director of CHANNAL. Brad, thank you for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me, Laurabel.
I'm so glad to have you sitting in our seat. So if you don't mind telling people, in case our viewers don't know, what exactly is CHANNAL?
Well, CHANNAL is, first of all, it's a mental health and addiction organization. What makes us unique is we are run entirely by people with lived experience of mental health issues, mental illness, or substance use issues. So all our services are provided through the lens of a consumer, the lens of a peer, but ultimately the lens of someone with lived experience of those sorts of issues in their life.
Perfect. So when people are reaching out to CHANNAL, they know the person on the other end is someone with lived experience who understands what path that they might be walking themselves.
Absolutely, and just like a clinician would have a role in someone's care, it's always nice to have someone who gets it and someone who can say, like, yeah, I've been there too, and affirming that our own stories are unique, but it's always nice to feel that connection, and when you're feeling isolated, knowing someone else gets what you're experiencing is so critical to providing hope.
Okay, perfect. So what kind of help exactly does CHANNAL provide to people?
Well, we function in three main areas, but most of our frontline work is in peer support. Our most well-used offering is our provincial warm line, which we have in English and just recently in French. And basically that's open 13, 14 hours a day with trained, certified peer supporters so that someone can call in a pre-crisis stage to receive support, a conversation, to share their story and help find form in it, to find avenues for hope, and to find ways to get other supports within the community. So oftentimes we will refer people to other organizations, to the health authorities to find support. And on top of the warm line, we offer one-on-one sessions for our peers. We do groups, we do family groups, we do wellness workshops, so that there's a variety of ways people can find care as they're journeying through their recovery process.
Okay, so what can someone expect when they reach out to CHANNAL for the first time?
The first thing they can expect is a listening ear. You know, I've got a psychologist, I've got a GP, I've got people who are part of my healthcare team, and oftentimes when I'm going to them, I'm looking for advice. I'm looking for a solution. But one of the foundational aspects of lived experience and peer support is that we have our own answers. We champion self-advocacy. We champion that idea that the care of a person should be person-centered, and therefore, if someone reaches out to CHANNAL, that's the first thing they're going to receive. They're not going to find someone wanting to tell them what to do. They're going to find someone who supports them in constructing their own story and finding out what the next step may be. And usually those are immediate steps. Okay. You know, I'm in a place where I need something. What can I do to move out of this place where I may be stuck? Okay.
So the services CHANNAL provides, are they centered within just the Avalon, or do we have services for everyone within the province?
We have services. We actually have staff from here to Happy Valley Goose Bay and almost everywhere in between. Our warm line is for anyone in Newfoundland and Labrador, of course. But all our services can be accessed. We have virtual groups, we have virtual family groups, and we have offices in St. John's, Mount Pearl, Marystown, Grand Falls, and Stephenville, and we have staff present in about 15 other communities working with regional health authorities to provide support to peers who may be more vulnerable or more marginalized in different ways in our society.
Okay, that's fantastic to know. So when people reach out to CHANNAL, they're able to kind of access a variety of services. So there's the warm line they can call into if they're in a pre-crisis situation, but you do offer counseling and kind of one-on-one and family sessions, should that be what they need at that time?
Absolutely, and again, ours is always about that holistic idea of care. So if someone did enter into a crisis stage, we would stay and support them, but we would also redirect them to the other appropriate services, whether that be the crisis line if it was immediate, or to more holistic services in their health authority. But we understand that the warm line, although it's probably our most well-known service, is just one service, and particularly during the pandemic, there's a lot of isolation being experienced, and we've seen that on our warm line, that a one-on-one session, whether that be virtual, whether that be face-to-face, outside offering the context of peer support, is just providing connection. which we're all yearning for so much the past 20 months.
So we know CHANNAL has been entrenched in our community for such a long time. What have you guys noticed as an organization as gaps that exist in the mental health services?
I think the biggest gap is long-term care for people with mental illness and more persistent substance use issues. You know, there's a lot of focus on mental health and wellness, and that is so important. And for the general population, that is what is needed to build a wellness strategy, to build self-care practices so that you can flourish and there is an elasticity to when you face a problem. But for someone with a more severe mental illness or a more persistent mental illness, they need a continuity of care, and of course, you know, wait times, you know, for psychiatrists, for psychologists, just oftentimes the prohibitive cost of some of these features, if they're not covered by a healthcare provider, often leaves those most marginalized out. So as we're improving as a society in leaps and bounds in supporting mental health and wellness and furthering the conversation, those often suffering the most damaging effects of mental illness are sometimes still being left out of those conversations. And it's important that they become part of that conversation, because if not, the problem could be society thinks it's doing a really great job. And it is for the 95%, but those 5% have such needs that need to be met, and we really owe it to support the most marginalized in our community in that way.
So we know the pandemic has had an impact on people's mental health, but what would you like to see moving forward for people's mental health and for CHANNAL?
I think the first thing that I'd like to see is that this continued focus on mental health and wellness remains a part of the dialogue, because getting things out of the shadows is the first way to destigmatize. And I think CHANNAL sees its role as championing the voice of lived experiencing, championing person-centered care, and the fact that people are at the middle of the decisions that are made, because I think it's really possible as we come out of a pandemic, as government and business makes decisions, that it will be easy to forget some of the lessons we've learned, and the promoting strong mental health, strengthening social supports, and ensuring that those who are marginalized, particularly through their mental illness or their substance use issues, are still a part of the conversation, and that coming out of a pandemic, the tough decisions that are made include people with lived experience at the table, as we know how best to advocate for ourselves and advocate for what we need to flourish as we come out of the pandemic.
Well, I'd like to thank you so much for sitting down with me to have such an important conversation about mental health in our province.
Thanks so much for having me, Laurabel.
And we'll be right back.
If you have a comment about this program, we'd love to hear it. Email or call us, or send us your feedback through social media.
Thank you so much to all our guests for joining us today to have a wonderful, in-depth conversation about mental health. We know mental health is something that's very important. We all have mental health, and it's something we all need to take care of. If you feel that you're having a crisis or you're having any kind of issues, please do not hesitate to reach out to the Warm Line. There'll always be someone on the other end willing to hear you out and have a conversation with you. I'd like to also thank Out of the Fog for having me as a guest host today. After 20 years in the community, you continue to make a great impact, and we'll see you again later.
If you have a comment about this program, we'd love to hear it. Email or call us,